So thank you so much for being here. I am so honored, so excited, and so nervous to have you in Cosas que Contar podcast to talk about EFT tapping. As I told you before, when we were talking on Instagram, tapping is gaining popularity in Mexico and in other Spanish-speaking countries, which is amazing. But I wanted to ask you, like, what's your story with tapping? How do you start the research? Why? What made you curious about it?
Yeah, thank you, Danny, and thank you so much for the opportunity just to have a chat today. So, my journey is probably 25 years ago, roughly, where I was a young psychologist and obviously working in eating disorders as my clinical field. And I was very much, I guess, frustrated with the traditional talk therapies that I had learned. So, this was 2 decades ago. They just weren't working well in that clinical area. So I was complaining to a colleague, as you do, a little bit of whinging. And he said to me, I found this technique online. It was back in dial up internet days. So he was a very patient man and would sit there and dial in and wait for things to load. And he said, and I don't know how it works, but it's a little bit weird and it's sort of tapping on acupressure points. Anyway, I had no idea what he was talking about. I wasn't patient enough to sit there and watch videos. And he came to I was running a local support group for eating disorder sufferers. And we were getting a lot of women turning up every single week. So he'd come along a few months later to help me just kind of facilitate the group. And in that group, a young girl had a panic attack. So she started to hyperventilate. So he sort of just said, I'll take her outside. And obviously I kept talking about whatever I was teaching. And they came back into the room. I'm not kidding, about 5 minutes later. And she was calm and composed, finished out the rest of the group. Everyone went home. And I said to him, what happened there? And I wrote in my book, The Science Behind Tapping, I wrote that I thought he'd given her a Valium or something. And I thought, oh no, this is not good, because she was just so calm. And he said, no, I did that tapping thing I've been trying to tell you about. And I said, okay, tell me more about this, because he tried to tell me a few months earlier. I didn't really know what he was talking about. He kept saying it was weird. But because I'd seen this outcome, I'd seen this young woman hyperventilating and really panic. They went outside and literally came back 5 minutes later and she was calm. I knew something had happened. So obviously then that led to going to a few workshops and things like that. And within a couple of years, my academic job required me to do some research. So I'd said to my team leader at the time, well, look, I've been learning this tapping thing. I really want to see, why does this work and would it work for other things? And we decided we would start our research in food cravings and weight loss and obesity. Anyway, he said to me, okay, that's a bit strange. I showed him what it was. And he said, nobody will come to your research trials. And then what are you going to do? And I'm like, I don't know. How about I just see what happens? So I was young and naive 20 years ago. And we went on a local TV show just to advertise the trial. We said, look, it's just 4 weeks, 2 hours a week. It's free. But if you're genuinely tried everything else, trying to lose weight, and people did need to be overweight or obese, give us a phone call or send us an email. And Denny, 4,500 people rang or emailed from the first trial. And then my boss said to me, what are you going to do now? And I said, I don't know. So it kind of was the first, particularly in Australia, EFT research trial of that magnitude, but that showed us, people saw me doing it on the TV. So I was doing it with a chocolate muffin on the TV, going, this is what we're going to do. And yet people still rang. So even though we didn't have much research, we didn't know how it worked. So that kind of was 20 years ago now. And obviously we've done lots and lots of research since and understand a little bit more about how this works.
That's amazing. I actually, the first time I tried tapping because I was having anxiety and I Googled it, I found Gala and I started doing whatever she was doing and I felt like really relaxed and I was like, what is this thing? But at the time I didn't know about you. I learned about you in Gala's certification. And that's
Yeah.
when I got, all involved in the research and all that. And I actually heard you say that when you wrote your book, The Science Behind Tapping, it was actually Joe Dispenza, the one who told you you should write a book about the
He
science
did.
thing. And you were like, no, I don't think anyone's going to be interested in that. What made you think that? It's my favorite part about the whole thing.
Yeah, and it's funny how many people do get into the research and the science, and not from my world. I was. Joe was here in Australia. We were at a conference together, and we'd only just met each other. So this was 2015, and he's like, "You should write a book." And I'm like, and I said, "What am I going to write a book on?" Because I had written other books on behavior change, unconscious behavior, but they were just little books, locally. And he goes, no, no, you should write a book on the science behind tapping. And I genuinely said to him, who would read that book? And he was the reason that Hay House published the book. And I said to him, all right, if I have to write this book, you have to write the foreword, which he graciously did. So Joe Dispenza wrote the foreword. And him and I have done lots of research together since then, particularly in the meditation space with primary schools. We've run 2 different trials now, as well as an adult school leader trial, and we're about to actually replicate one of our primary school trials in Mexico. So that is kicking off very shortly. Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm so happy that you're starting more of these things in Mexico. We love everything, energetics, meditation. We love it all. And I'm really happy that tapping is gaining popularity. But also, as I told you before, I've noticed that there's some misinformation about EFT, sadly. And the first question that people ask me, it's about the name, like what's EFT, what's tapping, what's clinical EFT tapping. Some people claim that if you hear someone talk about tapping, like they're not really professional. They have to talk about EFT. And I'm like, that's not really true, but I want to ask you about these 3 names, what they
Yeah.
mean. Are they
Yeah.
similar?
Absolutely. So EFT was named by Gary Craig, who is the originator of the current way that we obviously do EFT. He named it purely because he said when we stimulate these acupuncture points on the body, we get emotional freedom. So that was where he came up with the name, 50 years ago. The techniques part, obviously with the S on the end of techniques, is because in EFT there's about 48 different ways of using EFT. So it's not one technique. It's got a range of different things. A lot of certification programs teach all of those different ways. So there were versions of tapping before Gary Craig called different words. So thought field therapy, trauma tapping, lots of different things. So certainly lots of different ways of tapping existed, kinesiology, before EFT emerged. That was just what Gary Craig called it. So where the word clinical EFT came from was the version that was tested in research trials around the world. So here in Australia, in the US, the UK, Canada, anywhere, we all stick to the exact same version of EFT, and that is called clinical EFT. So it's used in the clinical research trials. It's the same short version of EFT. It doesn't include any eye movements or 9-gamut tapping, which if someone goes and looks at the full version of EFT, you'll find that there are finger point tapping, there's eye movements, there's sound. We don't use any of that in clinical EFT. We just have on 8 pressure points and everybody does the same thing. That makes it consistent in research. The word tapping actually became popularized because obviously if we're tapping with 2 fingers on a pressure point, that's where the kind of nickname come from. But it became popularized through some tapping world summits, particularly the one that is run by Nick and Jessica and Alex Ortner. So the tapping solution, which now about 15 years ago, wanted to share obviously the power of EFT, and so put together an online summit, which has been running every year ever since. They were the first ones really to talk about it being called tapping. So it's still EFT, it's still clinical EFT, and it's just nicknamed tapping. And people we like to use the phrase EFT tapping so that the whole phrase goes together. So people go, oh, it's EFT, but it's also tapping. So it just, it depends. It's all the same thing, just different words to describe.
Thank you for clarifying that. Also, I've heard you say that even when we tap in other places, other meridian points that are not part of the clinical EFT, that's also okay. But some people like think like, I saw someone tapping here. Is that good? Is that legit? Like, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so that one particularly, between the ring finger and the pinky is the 9 gamut point that's used in a lot of energy medicine, and it is used in a more extended version of EFT. So that is tapped on. So you may see things like that. People might use the side of the fingers, like tapping on where the fingernail touches. So there's a pressure point on every side. It's often why people bite their fingernails, because they get a stress release, because there's an acupressure point on the edge of each nail bed. So if someone was knowledgeable in acupuncture, the body systems, they might find they know other acupuncture points. And if you tap on those, well, you still use the same process, which is staying mindful to what's happening. You're actually stating what it is that you're trying to reduce or release. That will work. We just stick to the same 8 points in research to make it nice and easy to copy and replicate. Otherwise, people get confused about which point means this. And the other thing about other points on the body is some of them are contraindicated in acupuncture, in the acupuncture field, for certain conditions. For example, there's pressure points on the leg that they don't recommend people stimulate if they're pregnant, because it may bring on early labor, because of what the Chinese philosophies and Eastern philosophies will attribute those pressure points to organs in the body. So if someone was not aware of that, they may actually trigger certain things or reactions that obviously they don't want. So the 8 that have been chosen that we use in clinical EFT and the research trials appear to work for most problems for most people out there of any cultural background.
Wow, that's very interesting. I didn't know that about some acupoints. It's
Yeah.
really good to know. And now that you mentioned acupuncture, like, can anyone do tapping? Do we need to know about acupuncture? Like, or can we just push play on a YouTube video and mimic the movements?
Totally. And most people do. So if you were to do a quick Google, you'll find thousands of videos. Anybody can do tapping. We've done school trials, even with 5 and 6-year-olds, and we'll publish one of those later this year. So young children can do tapping. The caveat, or the kind of but be aware sort of phrase, is always that if you feel like you're tapping with a video and it's making you more distressed, then normally that means tapping's working really well, because it's actually getting to the core of something. But if you end up feeling worse, not better, that would be a sign that you do need to seek the support of someone trained, someone professional that can support you with whatever perhaps has come to mind. And that can happen with online or social media tapping, where people are like, yeah, this is great. Everyone tells me it's going to help me feel calmer, which it should, and that is the end goal. But if you were to feel worse and be more distressed, that's actually a sign you probably need more support, because tapping is working, but it's probably getting to some layers there that maybe surprised you, and that is a reality for some people. So we do always recommend, there's lots of organizations around the world that people can reach out and find someone that's trained professionally so that they can get more support.
Oh, that's really interesting, because I've also seen people use like a disclaimer, like, this is not a substitute to therapy, to your doctor, to medicine. And I think it's amazing to know that there's research that shows that you can do this instead of that, but it doesn't work for everybody. Like, the bottom line is to do whatever makes you feel good, right?
Yeah, and it is about, when you do learn the basics, there's safe ways that you can do tapping at home, like tap and breathe is one of the things that we always recommend. And we say to people, even if you just learn where the 8 points are, if you just take a comfortable breath as you tap, it will just help you stay regulated. It's a great tool to do, even to teach little children So you're not saying any words, you're just doing tap and breathe. And if anything, we're like, that's such a great psychological first aid technique, but it's not the full extent of tapping, but it's something that if everybody knew how to do tap and breathe, then potentially they're going to get, a nice outcome or just feel more centered in their body, before they go and do an interview or go and do something for work or have that uncomfortable conversation or whatever it is. So we are, sort of sharing different ways that people can use it. And then if you really do want to use it more therapeutically or like it's designed in therapy to overcome or to process things that have happened in your life, they're always best done being supported by somebody.
Yeah, that's great. I find that really important. Like, be support someone. It's really, really important for me. And I actually wanted to ask you, like, the research that you've been doing for over 20 years shows that tapping works for everything from anxiety to stress to PTSD, weight loss, food cravings. But why does it work for so many things?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. And a lot of people do wonder. And look, the short answer is the thing that we're targeting in tapping is always a stress response. So whether it's chronic pain, so we've recently done chronic pain research, or we've done research for patients going through chemotherapy for cancer, or we've done test anxiety in high school students, or we've done food cravings. What we're always targeting is some level of stress response, because if that stress response decreases and perhaps that stress center in the brain becomes calmer, people will be able to think more clearly about, what's going on in their life. They might think of a solution. They might remember in the exam that information that they studied. They might find some peace in, something that happened to them or whatever it might be. And if you can keep that stress response low in the body, not just at a psychological level, but we've done cortisol testing, we've done, DNA testing in research has been done on brain scans. It also shows the body does calm down as well. So if cortisol is a nice, even, low kind of level, then it isn't creating inflammation, which then impacts chronic pain and a whole range of different things. So the body actually responds to this tapping technique, and all the research in the last 20 years has been showing that and building on that. So ultimately, what are we looking at? A stress response in the body. Our current research is looking at the vagus nerve. So we are looking at polyvagal theory, and we've talked to Dr. Stephen Porges about this, but we're really looking at that potentially what we're doing is we're regulating the vagus nerve. So the whole autonomic nervous system in the body is becoming calmer and getting positively affected. So we have started to be able to test vagal nerve activity in some of our research.
Wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know that.
No, it
That's
hasn't come out yet. We haven't published, but we will
wow.
publish. Yes.
That's really interesting because I know there's people that don't care. Like, I just care that I'm feeling better. But I think it's really interesting to know, like, why can I use it for so many things, and
Yeah.
why can I use it every day? I saw a post that you did like a couple of weeks ago, like you can do tapping while brushing your teeth. Like, you can do
That's
it at
right.
any time of day. That's amazing.
Yeah. And I think, building a daily habit, even if it was just to do 3 rounds of tapping when you brush your teeth in the morning or maybe having your coffee, even about your day ahead or how you slept last night, just something, it builds a daily habit that then becomes an easy to remember skill when you do feel really stressed. And that's why we say if you just tap for 5 minutes every day, even if you're not really stressed, when the big things happen, you'll more easily remember, I've got to do that tapping thing. Whereas if you learn it once and then never do it again, it's very hard for it to be front of mind when something stressful does happen. So yes, we fully promote to everybody, just tap every day for a couple of minutes, and then you'll easily remember it when you need to.
Yeah, that's really great. Sometimes I'm stressed and I don't even know I'm stressed. And I've learned my normal is like this level of stress instead of being like down here.
Yeah.
So I really noticed that tapping makes me feel calmer, which is supposed to be
Yes.
my normal state. I have found
That's
out.
right.
Um, I wanted
Excellent.
to ask you about the the energetic side of
Yeah.
tapping, some people are still promoting it as an energetic technique. But is it an energetic technique? Was it ever an energetic technique?
Yeah, look, 50 years ago, when Gary Craig and even people prior to him in kinesiology and things like that, those fields, they absolutely described it because there was no research. People definitely felt better, and that's a subjective feeling. They're like, I feel calmer, or I can talk, calmly about that trauma that happened to me, that type of thing. So they didn't know. So they did describe it as an energetic shift in the body. And perhaps, in the meridian system, which is the acupuncture system. So anyone that's been to acupuncture might see those charts that are on the wall with those acupressure points. And it was described because there was no research 50 years ago. Now, bless the internet, that information is still circulated around, but some of it's 20 to 30 years old. And so sometimes people that perhaps are critical of EFT or any other techniques like this will often look to that and say, well, there's no evidence of energy shifting in the body and there's no evidence of meridians. Now, there is actually now evidence. So the meridian system has actually been studied, particularly coming out of North Korea. And this research started 20 years ago, but it's most recently only about 4 years ago, really because of the ability to do medical imaging and scanning. That has improved. So they've actually found that meridian system in the body, which they call the primovascular system, is physical. It's a physical concrete duct system. And if you inject tracer dye into it, in animal models, but also humans, you can see the dye coagulating into a little dense spot where the acupuncture point is. And you can see it traveling along where there's no acupuncture point. And then, of course, it becomes nice and dense. And we can see that now in imaging. We also know that we're having a profound impact through tapping on the body systems through cortisol, blood pressure, heart rate variability, things like EEG brainwaves, functional MRI, DNA testing. Those studies didn't exist 50 years ago either, but we have all of those. So we talk about them all the time. We're like, yeah, actually, did you know that my chronic pain patients, before a 6-week EFT program, this is what their brain looks like, and here's what it looked like 6 weeks later, and it looks like a non-chronic pain patient in terms of where the blood flow goes. So the research has rapidly improved. So I can understand why people maybe, they don't read the research and still talk about meridians and energy. So we just gently correct people and kind of go, yep, that's how it was described 50 years ago. But did you know? And often the answer is, I had no idea. And you're like, yeah. so we just keep sharing the research. We keep updating people's knowledge because it is how it was described back in the beginning, but it is so much more than meridians. That's now called the primovascular system. Energy, it's not about energy. It's probably about the vagus nerve and the autonomic nervous system and the stress response. We absolutely have, the last decade of research on the biochemistry in the body. So yeah, it's just a gentle updating every time I kind of do talks and workshops. We're like, update your website if you've got the words meridian or energy on them, because the more people that do that and the more people that share, the easier it is for people to accept it but understand what's really happening.
Yeah, some people, when I started sharing, like, it's not an energetic technique, people were like shocked. I received DMs like, I'm not shifting my energy, like, what's going on? And I'm like, I think it's sexier to say like, oh, you're gonna change your energy than say you're gonna regulate your nervous system or whatever. But
Yeah.
it's really good to know like there's actually something going on in your body, and going back to the body, connecting with your body, I think it's really, really important, because we sometimes think like energy, like it's floating around us, and it's like, no, it's within yourself, and you're gonna feel better in so many ways, not only in your aura or whatever. So I think that's really great, and that's really important. But talking about the kind of energy side of it, can we use tapping to manifest, to create the life we want to create, or how can we do it properly to get to that point?
Absolutely. And yes, that's very attractive and very popular because often that's what people want to change. Perhaps having more, income in their life or money is going to take away stress, that kind of thing. So absolutely, they're valid human needs. And if we looked at, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a human, the base level is to have enough money to survive and to have a roof over your head and be able to, pay the bills and feed yourself. So you absolutely need that foundation before you can get to things like self-esteem, love and belonging, self-actualization, these things that we're talking about. And a lot of people jump straight to that through meditation practices, but they don't have that bottom rung of that pyramid really stable. So it's absolutely a valid need. Here's how tapping works in that area, though. And it is a little bit counterintuitive, but there's some great videos out there online that demonstrate this. It's not about positive tapping. So that's the one thing I do say in a lot of my workshops. We don't do positive tapping ever, despite what you might see on social media, because positive tapping or tapping with an affirmation of something that you might want to come true. So you might say, I easily attract all the income in the world that I need. So that might be a positive affirmation and people tap. If that's not true for you, if that has a limiting belief that comes to mind, we call them tail enders in tapping, that yeah, but that will always win over the positive affirmation. So it can make tapping look like it doesn't work for people. So people might kind of jump on a YouTube video and go, wow, this video is about how to attract more wealth into my life. But yet they've got a family history and a family story, of some genuinely serious things that happen in the finance kind of area, wealth area, or limiting beliefs. And the answer to this, because I promise people they can still get to that other side with the money, is you actually have to do the tapping on the limiting beliefs. You have to do the tapping on the things that might have happened to you that you remember. And sometimes they come to mind as you're tapping. So it can be, what was the family messaging or relationship with wealth or money or wealthy people that were in your life? Did you have those, kind of beliefs in the family? And that's what we actually do tapping on. So even in our training where we're training professionals to do this in a therapy sense, we teach them about this sort of area in life because people do want help with it. And we're like, but we don't do positive tapping. We're actually tapping on, yeah, I believe that I don't deserve more than someone else. So I recently did have a conversation with someone who openly talks about wanting to win money. Nothing wrong with that. And I'm like, do you have any internal beliefs? Because she obviously has never won any money. But I'm like, do you have any beliefs? And she said, yeah, I don't believe I deserve to win over someone else. And I said, well, that's the thing we would do tapping on. Like how much do you believe that if you had to give it a number out of 10 just as a rating, 10 being the strongest? And she's like, 9 out of 10. And I'm like, that's what we actually tap on. So we tap to reduce the strength of that belief. And then we can just see what happens in life. Because if you no longer believe that type of belief, then you might notice different opportunities in life. Someone might reach out to you with something that wouldn't have thought to do that when you were holding a certain belief. So that's where we then see, because confirmation bias can happen. We only notice the things in life that confirm our own beliefs. So if you don't have that belief anymore, life looks like it's a lot different. Will that person that I just mentioned go on to win money? I have no idea. But the benefit of not having that belief will probably impact other areas of her life as well, because that deserving kind of, thing affects so much. It could affect relationships. It could affect what you get paid at work. It could affect, whether or not you eat as much food as your kids. You give them more because you don't deserve. Like, it has such far-reaching effects, that one belief. So yeah, I just sort of like to throw out there that there's some great videos out there on positive tapping, but if people have ever done them and find they don't work, that's why, because it's that little voice in the back of your head that kind of goes, no, you're not. No, you can't. That's not possible. That's actually what we do tapping on.
Yeah, I remember when I was taking the certification with Gala, she always told it, you have to be completely honest with yourself. You cannot say like, oh, I am abundant if you don't really
Yep.
believe in that. So
No.
I find what you say really interesting, and it's really helpful in order to, if we want to change our beliefs around money, it's not going to happen with affirmations. It's going to happen, putting the spotlight in that thing that sometimes we don't want to see.
Yeah.
And we're running out of time, but I want to ask you if there's anything else you want people to know about EFT tapping, about the research, about the technique.
Yeah, probably, mostly when people are kind of curious or even if they're a bit resistant, we always invite people to just stay open and perhaps give it a go. I often find that if people give tapping a try, notice physically in themselves a difference, then they might be curious to kind of go and find out a bit more about what is happening here, why is this working, that kind of thing. Often when people kind of go, oh, I don't think that'll work for me, or actually that's the most silliest thing I've ever seen, they often haven't tried it. And I would always kind of, say to people, you may want to do that with someone rather than perhaps, a video online if it's the first time you're ever trying it, that kind of thing. And, spread the word that if you have had good experiences, the one thing I say to parents, so often we'll have parents that have learnt tapping, love it, works really effectively for them, but they'll say, I just wish my partner, child, teenager would also do tapping. And we often say to them, where do you do your tapping? And they're like, oh, in my office with the doors closed, or in the bedroom with the doors closed. And no one ever sees them tapping. And so I have a 21-year-old and a 17-year-old now, both daughters in my house. And obviously I knew tapping before they were born. They have grown up seeing me do tapping. So if I want to do tapping on something at the end of the day, I sit in the lounge room on the lounge quietly to myself, but they'll walk past. And so to them, it's very normal. Oh, mum's tapping. They also know mum might be calmer after she finishes her tapping. So we always encourage people that if you are already tapping, tap in front of people in your own home if you're comfortable enough, because that's when people go, what are you doing? You go, well, this helps me calm down. Then it's much easier if someone else in your house feels a little bit stressed, or they might come and say, can you do that tapping thing with me? So I am married to an engineer, not in my world at all, but he has seen me do tapping. So of course, as time goes by, he will say, can you do that tapping thing with me? Even though it's not in his world as an engineer, because he's seen me do it. So I do encourage people, openly tap, so that if you want to extend the invitation to anybody else, that's the easiest way to do it.
Thank you so much. I have one last question, and
Sure.
you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't found your books in Spanish. So is there a plan to publish them in Spanish? I've seen French, Italian, but not Spanish. And I think
Portuguese.
people will really benefit from reading your
Yeah,
books.
look, that is a Hay House question,
Okay.
because they do have a foreign rights arm, so most publishing houses. Absolutely, I think they're always open, but it is absolutely a decision that they make. And obviously, I can't read any of those languages, so they employ people that are highly skilled. So, yes, I understand there's French, Portuguese, Spanish. There's a Polish. Actually, think I'm in Polish as well. I do have copies of all of them. It's funny. My daughter, youngest daughter, she does study French, and I said here, and I gave her a copy of the Science Behind Tapping in French, and she could actually read all the
Oh, that's
introductions,
so cool.
which I actually dedicate that book to my two daughters, and she actually could read it. So that was quite cool to witness.
That's really cool. And I hope it gets published in Spanish
Yeah,
soon. If it does, I'll be happy to share it with people so they can buy
thank you,
it and
Dan.
read it. Not only the science behind tapping, also your second book that talks about memory and all that
Memory.
stuff.
Yeah,
That
thank you so
those
much.
are great. So thank you so much for being here. I'm so honored to have you here. I've been learning so much from you about this beautiful technique, and I want to thank you for sharing all this information with the world. I can't wait to read about the vagus nerve and everything that you keep sharing with us about this technique. So thank you so, so much for being here, for giving me the time to do it.
My absolute pleasure, Danny. Thank you so much.
Have a beautiful day.
Thank you so much.
Bye.